Thank you for joining for another episode of Simontific. We have a great episode for you today about defaunation. We hope you enjoy. Imagine you're walking through a lush forest in the heart of Brazil when you run into a section of trees cordoned off with fencing and yellow tape. Ecologist Dr. Malu Jorge from Vanderbilt University uses this exact methodology to conduct her research on defaunation, which is the loss of animals in environments. We brought Dr. Jorge in to explain it herself.
So we put like a fence in the forest, and we exclude the mammals. We actually don't allow them to go into the forest, and we try to see what happens with the forest if you exclude the mammals. And then we compare with the forest where they are visiting, or what happens if you remove a forest, right? You go and cut down a forest, or cut down, it doesn't have to be a forest, a prairie, for instance, right? And that is now pretty obvious. I mean, 30 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, it wasn't. But that we remove carbon, we emit more carbon, we change the soil properties, etc. But there is removing the animals. It's almost like a hidden effect, because you still see the vegetation, like the structure of the system, but some of the key players are not there anymore.
Now let's bring in Oscar Fox, an environmentalist who happens to be my older brother. Now, Oscar, let's have you respond to the idea that an environment can secretly and invisibly be collapsing, while visibly it looks like it's thriving.
Well, that's an interesting question. I'd say that it doesn't surprise me that much, honestly. Knowing that the things that we think are the most beautiful and the most healthy looking and green are things like lawns and highly monocultural and synthetic. I'm not so surprised that really a truly healthy ecosystem isn't so glamorous.
Now let's hear from Dr. Jorge about how people are utilizing this research.
There is one project that I'm absolutely a fan of, which is called Refauna, I guess in English. In Portuguese is Refauna. And what happens is that, so the forest surrounding Rio de Janeiro, the city that everybody knows from Brazil, has been regenerating for almost 200 years, right? So there was a huge Atlantic forest, like rainforest in that region. They cut most of the forest to plant coffee, and then for whatever economic reasons, that was abandoned, and the forest regrew, but there weren't any animals there anymore. And they've been reintroducing very slowly, and in this kind of like a step-by-step way of doing different mammals. So they started with the goodies, which are kind of small. They're large rodents, but they're small, medium-sized mammals. They're really important for seed dispersal, and a lot of the plants in rainforest, tropical rainforest, depend on seed dispersal, depend on animals for seed dispersal. So they reintroduced agoutis, they reintroduced tapirs, which are the largest herbivore that we have in neotropical rainforests in Brazil. But they are solitary, so it's a little, if you're able to reintroduce a couple, like a male and a female, you may be able to actually reestablish a initial population. And then now they're thinking about other species such as deer and peccaries and etc. So it's a really, really cool project that is going on for decades now in Brazil. And now the forests that were kind of empty forests, beautiful but empty forests, have all this different fauna there.
Forests. What stood out to you the most about how the forest has changed?
Interesting question. I think what was so interesting to me is how it's very clear that this idea of like separating the fauna from the flora, and that the flora itself can't just self-regulate and it needs the fauna. It just speaks to the fact that these things aren't separate, that they're part of the same ecosystem, that they've co-evolved over millennia. But what I'll say is that I have some reservations because, humans don't have the best track record with ecosystem management and pest control. I'm thinking about like invasive species control and how, including new species into an ecosystem might destabilize it. So it's just a thing to balance.
All right, well, that will do it for our podcast today on Defaunation, featuring Dr. Jorge at Vanderbilt University and environmentalist Oscar Fox. Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you for having me.